Now, another common issue that I come across that I like to get fixed in the sort of editing stage before I start a mix is things like this. So you see here how some lines of this verse are pretty high and at a nice level, but some of it is really low, like here, 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 and at the end there it goes almost too loud, louder than all the rest of the file. So how do we deal with this? Well, first of all, I like to set an overall level for the thing. So I might pick an area like this and just adjust the gain over here to somewhere where I like to see my vocals, which is about there. So that area now looks about right to me on how I like to start from when I'm mixing. So, and now we'll roughly just go through and make some cuts where the level changes the most. So right there, for example, at the start here, you can see that it's really too low. So I would use the gain tool here, or again, you can go to the gain tool in Logic and use that. I personally prefer to go over here and use the gain in the kind of region editor here. So I'll gain that bit up, maybe bring this one down a touch, bring this one down a little bit, bring this one up. I think that end bit probably needs its own region as well. Turn that bit down, and then the end bit needs to come down quite drastically. So just after that little bit of editing, you see just how much this is looking much more kind of in line and level. Now I've done it very kind of rough there, and what I would do is go through and make sure that all of these chops that I've done are kind of in a good place and not sort of in the middle of a breath. You see a breath here.
And I've been with my...
So you don't want to cut in the middle of a breath. So you've got sort of half a high breath and then half a low breath. You want to make sure that the cuts are done nicely. So I would go through and clean up all of these chops that I did like this. And then I would also listen as well. I would then probably put on my plugins down here, just a sort of rough mix, a rough de-esser, compressor, just to kind of have a listen through and perfect these level adjustments, because you don't want to just trust your eye on this. You need to use your ears and decide sort of how loud each part needs to be.
If I think you're hard, I'll tell you. I don't care if you're a fan of my work. If we shake hands on it, it's a deal, rude boy, cause you know I'm a man of my word. The name on the back of my shirt. And I've been with my girl for a long time. The name on the back of my shirt. And I've been with my girl for a long time. So when I write one thing I know that I got, that's ownership. Over time when you deal with loads of shit, gotta stay real in the highs and lows of it. Over time when you deal with low, I spent too much time in bed. I'm alive.
So you see how that last bit there was still too loud, even though it looked kind of right, it was still too loud. So we're going to turn that down a touch more.
I spent too much time in bed. I'm alive, so I know that grime ain't dead. Yeah.
Quick tip for when you're doing this, I think it's really important to have a few things actually going on in terms of processing on the file that you're working on. So particularly a compressor, I'm using R compressor by Waves here. Just a really basic settings. This is not a mix by any means, but it's just a sort of, it gives you a better idea of how the verse is going to sound when it is mixed if you've got a little bit of processing on it. So I much prefer to have some level of processing on when I'm doing things like these gain adjustments that I've shown you.
If I think you're hard, I'll tell you. I don't care if you're a fan of my work. If we shake hands on it, it's a deal, rude boy, cause you know I'm a man of my word. What genres haven't I merged? What genres haven't I murked? What genres haven't I merged? What genres haven't I murked? Oh.
Yeah, so I just find it works way better to have something on the channels so you can hear the gain changes a lot easier, in my opinion. Now, once I've fixed any of those kind of issues like clipping and room reverb, I move on to the editing stage of the vocal. So you see here, I've got multiple layers. So I've got a main verse here. I've got verse background vocals. I've got some ad-libs. And then this is the chorus here. Main chorus, double chorus, and 2 kind of background vocals for the chorus as well. So the first thing to say is that if the vocals come in and they're super low like this, we're going to have to do something about that first of all. So I like to get my vocals to a nice level where I can see what's going on with the waveform, and also so it's going into the plugins at a nice level. So you can either use the gain tool over here to do that and bring it up to a level where it's at least nicely visible and it's providing a nice level for your plugins. Or you can use the actual wave editor and come down here and change the gain here at the sort of audio level, or use normalize, which are other good options as well. But whichever way you do it, it is really important to get sort of a nice level coming out of your vocals so that you're starting from a good place. The first step for me when editing vocals is always to remove all the silent parts from the files that don't need it. For example, the verse backgrounds, for me, they don't need to have all these gaps. The ad-libs don't need it. And these chorus background vocals don't need it either. Now, it's not essential to get rid of all of this, but generally you're going to have things like bleed from the headphones. You're going to have maybe people moving around in the room, the artist moving around in the room. You're going to have breaths on here maybe that you just don't need or want on the background vocals and on the ad-libs. So I will always chop out all of this. So there's many different ways of doing this, and none of them are really right or wrong. It's just workflow and what works best for you. But the first thing I like to do is come over here to this button here, which basically doesn't affect the audio files, but it just makes them appear a lot bigger. So you can click on this and hold and sort of drag it to whatever level you like. Now what this allows is for me to see better. It kind of just zooms in on the waveforms basically, but what this allows is to see things like this here. You know, you can now see that there is audio happening in these gaps that you don't want. And it also makes it easier to edit out these things now because you can see clearer. See this area here? When I take this button off, you can't see that there is actually some useful audio going on there. But when I press this button, you can see that, you know, whatever that is,
Mouth.
the sort of TH of the word mouth,
Mouth.
I would have maybe cut that off if I didn't put this button on. So really important to not remove things that you don't want to remove. So let's leave that button on, and this would be the way manually to do it. So I've selected the marquee tool and I'm just going through and removing all of this sort of empty space. Other way to do it is to use the scissor tool and just do cuts like this and remove them. And this is the way that I did it for many years, and it took me a long time. Then I learned about strip silence. Now, I don't know if this is called something different in other DAWs, but in Logic, it's called strip silence. So to use strip silence, I'm going to right click on the region, go down here to split, and then remove silence from audio region. So this brings up this box here, which is basically showing me the waveform, and the parts that have these boxes around them is basically the parts that are going to stay, and anything in these gaps it's going to remove. It's important to pay attention to this area here and not just accept the sort of default settings. So I normally come down to the threshold and kind of turn this down to 30, 31, 32, something around there. And then I will always add some time before and some time after. Just click and drag on these numbers here to just kind of give yourself a little bit of leeway on either side. And then I will press OK. Now, as you can see, that's automatically cut out all of the silence in between the parts of useful audio. However, you can't fully rely on this tool to be absolutely perfect. So if you zoom in here, you'll see it's left a piece there. You know, you'll see it's potentially cutting something off there. So it's always best to still go through and just, you know, fix any issues that might have caused. You know, there's a bit left there. Then what I would do is select all of this and sort of adjust to what seems right on each side. So you can see I'm just taking off, just trimming off the edges here of where the strip silence has left too much. Again, not perfect, and you will have to go through to some areas like you see here, it's cut off a piece of useful audio that we need. So I'll come back to that. But generally, I like to get it right so that most of the files, you see it's not done the right job there, but most of it is looking right, like all of this is looking right. Then I will use the fade tool. While this is all still selected, I'll select the fade tool and I'll just draw a fade on the start and a fade on the end. Other way of doing this is by using this section of the region editor here. But really important that we put fades at the start and the end. This is going to eradicate and get rid of any kind of clicks or pops that the audio makes when it just comes in sharply. And it's just going to make for a whole overall just cleaner sound. But then, like I say, I will go through and just adjust some of these because I don't think I need that. And I'll do this by eye to begin with, but you can do this while you're listening as well. I like to do this by eye to begin with, just because I think I get more done without listening, but then it's always good to listen after you've done this and just make sure that everything's cool. I'll do the same with the ad-libs. I'm just breezing through this. If I was doing this for real, then I would take my time more, but I'm just doing this for the purposes of this demonstration, just really quickly. But they look pretty good anyway. And then we do the same with the BVs on the chorus. And you see how quick you can do this once you've got this workflow locked into how you want it. You can get it edited pretty quickly. Now, obviously, if the vocal is a more dirty vocal, if it's got more background noise, then it does make it more difficult. The strip silence doesn't do as good a job. But on this vocal, which was pretty clean, it's done a pretty good job here. So that's strip silence, really good tool, but just, as I say, don't rely on it to make the exact right decisions all the time. You still need to go through and just make sure you've not cut off anything useful. And, you know, you've got a little bit of sort of give and leeway on each side. You don't want to be excessively chopping off sort of natural parts of natural endings of words and things like that. The other thing I would do at this stage is clean up even the main vocal. So I'll do things like cut the, you know, anything excessive on the front of it, chop that off, put a fade. Same with the ending of the verse, chop that off, put a fade. The chorus here, just cut everything, put fades at the beginning and the end of everything. Again, you don't want it to look like this, where it's actually affecting the sort of useful part of the audio and fading in the first word. You want it to be before the first word, so more like this, and you can even shape these fades as well. But most of the time it's not necessary, but yeah. So that leaves us with quite a clean, edited vocal there, and we can move on to the next stage, which for me would be the breaths. Now, I know there's plugins out there and other tools that do automatic breath reduction or removal, but for me, I like to do it manually. I find it's the best way, and the way I like to do it is by going through, sometimes listening, sometimes not. I can do some of this just by eye. I can see that that's a breath, that's a breath, that's a breath. So we go through and we just create a new region for all of our breaths using the scissor tool, or we can use the marquee tool as well. Again, I'm just going through this quickly just to show you, but in reality I would listen, or I would do all these chops, turn them down, and then listen to make sure that I've not cut off any sort of the end of any words or S's or anything like that. But you get the idea. So then what I do, once I've made all those regions, is just go through and select them all like this. I can turn off this actually. Go through and select them all, and then again come over to our gain here and just pull that down. Now the amount that you pull this down is going to depend on the song and the feeling that you're going for and the loudness of the breaths, you know, sort of how loud they are on the actual recording. Generally I like to go to sort of -5 all the way to -8 or 9 depending on how loud they are, but I can tell that these are not too loud, so I'm going to leave it around -5, -6. Then with all of these breaths still selected, I will go through and actually take a listen. And at this point, I like to turn on a compressor and a de-esser, some basic processing here, just so it gives me a better idea of how this will sound when it's mixed. You know, using compression will obviously bring up the breaths. You know, it brings up the quiet parts, turns down the loud parts. So it's important to listen, I think, for the breaths with some compression on.
If I think you're hard, I'll tell you. I don't care if you're a fan of my work. If we shake hands on it, it's a deal, rude boy, cause you know I'm a man of my word. What genres haven't I merged? What genres haven't I murked? Man knows haven't I merged? What genres haven't I murked? Man know me, Cam Dog, the waviest, ain't the name on the back of my shirt.
So you see there how the breaths are still there, so it still sounds natural, but they're not standing out massively. So if I put this back to 0 and you put the gain back, and you'll see how much louder these are.
My word. What genres haven't I merged? What genres haven't I murked? Man know me, Cam Dog, the waviest, ain't the name on the back of my shirt. And
so for me, they're just a little bit too loud. So like I say, pull them down here to like -5, -6.
my word. What genres haven't I merged? What genres haven't I murked?
And then once I'm happy with the level that I've got them at, I'll go in and I'll put fades between all of these regions. Now the way I do that is by having the drag over here on X fade, on crossfade. So that means I can just simply drag these into each other and it creates, as you can see, it creates a fade. There's other ways of doing this, but just make sure that there's a fade on either side of the breath, just again, so we don't get any clicks and pops, and it's more of a kind of natural transition between the two different areas which have different gain levels. Now, some people completely remove breaths, and for me, I don't like that sound. Sometimes it works for particular parts of a song or particular songs. I understand it can work. For me, I like to keep it more natural by keeping the breaths in but just turning them down. And I like to do it at this stage here on the region level rather than with sort of automation after. You know, you could do this and automate these down. That's valid as well. But for me, I like to do it at the region level here so that it goes into the plugins at that level. So what I'm trying to do is actually adjust the audio so that my plugins respond to that audio. Sometimes when you're doing automation, you're doing post plugin automation, so it's happening after the processing has happened. For me, I like to get the breaths lower and the editing done so that before any plugin touches this recording, it's sort of at a more managed kind of level. So the next really important thing that I do on every single mix before I start mixing is time alignment on any doubles or any backups or BVs in the track. So you see here we've got sort of a lot of the sort of ending of words, the ending of lines doubled on this track here. And also we've got a double track over here on the chorus and these sort of BV background vocals on the chorus as well. Now, obviously, naturally, when you do a double layer, a double take of anything, it's going to be slightly out of time to some degree with the main layer. And sometimes it's nice to leave some of that more natural so that it stands out more, it creates more of a kind of multiple person effect or whatever. But generally, I like to go in and tidy this up. Now, the way I do this is, again, clicking this button here to sort of bring up the waveform so I can see them better. And then I zoom all the way in. And I go through and I just move these regions until they just look more in time. Now, again, you can do this with listening as well. And I will always listen after I've done this to make sure I've done a good job. But a lot of this I find I can do by eye. I've been doing this for so many years now that I'm pretty good at identifying sort of where we're at with a waveform. So I like to do this firstly by eye, and then I'll take a listen and adjust anything if it needs to be adjusted after if I hear anything, you know. Now you see on a region like this part's looking pretty much in time, but it's starting to go out of time here onwards. So I'll make a cut and I'll just move that piece, and then I might just put a fade there and a fade there to just make it smoother. And then again over here. So I'll just take my time and just go through all of this and just make it a little bit tighter and nicer, so that it sounds less messy. Now again, you might want a more messy sound for your song, and that's fine. You can leave it or just adjust accordingly. But for me, I like to at least start from a cleaner point, and then if I want to make it more messy after, I can kind of do that to my taste by moving things around more afterwards. But let's start from a clean place, and then we can add that ruggedness or that naturalness of the sort of more out of time stuff afterwards. So that's basically how I do it. I'm going to breeze through the rest of it, maybe put this on time lapse and get the whole thing done here. So that's the verse fully time aligned. I'll try and show you a kind of before and after with this, but this is how it sounds now with the BVs time aligned.
Hard, I'll tell you, I don't care if you're a fan of my work. If we shake hands on it, it's a deal, rude boy, cause you know I'm a man of my word. What genres haven't I merged? What genres haven't I murked? Man know me, Cam Dog, the waviest thing, the name on the back of my shirt.
So let me just drag that bit out and just show you the difference on that piece.
The waviest thing, the name on the back of my shirt. The waviest thing, the name on the back of my shirt. The waviest thing, the name on the back of my shirt.
You see the difference there? It's subtle on this particular song because his backups were pretty good, pretty in time. But yeah, you just see the difference of the kind of more messy sound beforehand and the cleaner sound after. And again, I want to stress how important it is to make sure that everything has a fade. So any chop here, like I've done here, make sure you put a fade on the start and end of every single region, just so you're not getting any clicks and pops and things are not coming in too abruptly. Just one more quick thing on the time alignment. You may come across something like this where it's like looking awkward, looking difficult. You know, this has been said a lot faster than the main layer. So what do we do about that? Well, this is where we can use the flex tool within Logic, and I'm sure other DAWs have this as well, but for in Logic, I can just simply drag this out and kind of adjust the timing on that like that. Now, I don't like to do this too much because it does degrade the quality of the audio to some degree.
Your last poker chip.
See how that sounds kind of robotic and weird now?
Your last poker chip.
So I don't like to do that too much. I'd much rather go through and kind of cut things about and then join them with a fade than using the flex tool or sort of time stretching or squeezing things, because that does degrade audio quality. As we bring this part to an end, there's a couple of things I just want to mention, and that is don't overdo this, don't overthink this, particularly if you're sending this off to an engineer like me or anyone else. They might prefer to do this part. I definitely do, because I like to do it in my way and make sure that it's done correctly. So if you are sending your song off to be mixed by somebody else, then it's best to just leave this alone, leave the breaths in, leave some gaps on either end of all your audio. You know, don't take out the silence, don't do any of that unless, you know, you're mixing the song yourself. If you're mixing yourself, then it's important to do this. But if you are sending it off to somebody, then it's probably best to leave it to them. I know that I definitely prefer to do this myself. You know, I get through this pretty quickly. It's not a big deal for me to deal with. So if you're sending your song to me, which you can, just leave this work to me, please.